The resilience mass nodes are a reflection, a science-based set of reflections on how resilience actually should look like. But the should needs to then be applied to reality. In the case of finance, one of the areas that we identified for applicability of the resilience mass nodes is how to use different sources of finance to make adaptation and resilience work on the ground. And one of the major reflections over the past years is that there are some kind of finances. Finances have different flavors, but there is one in particular that we would like to focus today and how that actually deploys on the ground, and that is concessional finance. And I won't go into a lot of the details on what concessional finance is. We'll hear from a lot of panelists and experts on that. But it's basically patient capital, money that it's allowed to fail, that can test things, that can experiment things. Again, now connecting to the resilience mass nodes. One of the mass nodes, I think it was number 6, if I'm good with my memory. Was it 4? 4 is about experimentation, trial and error, failure, and being okay with failing. And concessional finance allows for that. The thing is whether we have enough of that or not in the system. And our argument is there is not enough patient capital in the system. So for adaptation and resilience, we need to try and try and try and be willing to fail and then learn and do it better. So let me move now to the real practitioners on the ground that will allow us to focus on how that interconnection between different flavors of finance looks like, should look like, and how to make it better. So let me pass the mic to Luca Torre from GAWA Capital, and he will introduce himself. He will explain a bit of, what his vision on this, and then we'll move into a panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank Jorge for really the opportunity to speak before you, before such a knowledgeable audience, and certainly I have much more to learn than to share myself. Briefly about myself, just so that my comments are put in the right context. I'm the CEO of GAWA Capital. We're an impact investing fund management company. We manage around 300 million euros. And over the past 15 years, we have made about 50 investments in financial institutions and businesses around agriculture and climate, with the purpose of really strengthening the resilience of small farmers and small businesses. And I've been using concessional finance extensively to catalyze, to ensure that private institutional investors will come to the table. I think we very well know the kind of urgency that we are currently facing. Myself, over the past 15 years, have been traveling extensively in emerging markets and met many farmers, but over the past few years, almost every single farmer and small businesses that I met, they just mention how climate is the real challenge and how they're trying to cope with that. And concessional finance really can represent a very powerful leverage to catalyze most capital. Why do we need more capital? Because farmers, for example, as they're facing a more erratic rate pattern, they do need to install irrigation systems, and they need to get the money to install that irrigation system. So again, capital is a very obvious, but it's a very important part of the equation. So today's panel, we will explore how we can more effectively channel concessional finance into transformative solutions guided by science. And this is what I want to focus my 3 minutes remark. Why science? What is concessional finance, first of all? Concessional finance is about bringing around the table organizations with very different perspectives on objectives on life. You bring together, you bring together the international financial institutions, private investors, people with very different perspective. And science is, in my view, the only way to create a common language, a common framework where everybody can agree upon. So let me illustrate this with a real example, so we make it really tangible. Earlier on this year, we successfully launched a fund called Quali. It's a 250 million euro initiative. We did the first closing, so we already have 140 million close, which is especially focused on supporting vulnerable small farmers and small businesses in Latin America and India. And in order to get this capital, we used a blended finance structure. So we had some international organizations, such as the Green Climate Fund. Some of you might be familiar with that. It's a United Nations kind of entity, the European Commission, which is a government. Those two entities provided the first loss. So what does it mean? It means that if something goes wrong with the fund, it's about failure that Jorge was mentioning, they will take the first hit. And that will allow larger institutional investors, and we're talking about very large insurance company, to invest in a fund that otherwise they wouldn't invest because they would feel too risky. Can you imagine I don't know, a Barclays or a Allianz or investing into a fund that invests in agriculture, in emerging market, in small business? That's going to be very difficult. So conscious of that, large institutional organization, they do that. Now, how can you bring together these two entities? Science is the answer. We all need to speak the same language, so that we understand what we really want to achieve. Secondly, science and technical expertise are also essential to design this blended finance structure. And then let me walk you through very briefly, I think it's interesting also for the following session, how we operate and how we do that, how these blended finance projects are created. The way we do is that we identify a very specific climate or social issue that we want to solve. For example, we want to help smallholder farmers increasing their productivity. Then we design a theory of change on how that problem can resolve, so what needs to happen for that to be resolved. And then we design an investment strategy, so in which companies do we need to invest in to unlock that theory of change. And once we have that investment strategies, which is basically in a form of we want to invest in this kind of company, this is the kind of tickets, this is the way that we'll be investing, we go to institutional investors, we go to pension funds and we say, do you like this? And typically they say, no, it's too risky. So then we go to the public investors that they will give us the concessional capital so that they can actually, so that the institutional investors can actually come in and we can unlock the many, many billions that we do need to solve these problems. All this process, again, starts with science, starts with a theory of change which is backed by science. So science is very, very important. And the third reason why we do really need science involved in blended finance and catalysts is that we are seeing how governments are reducing their development budget dramatically. So there will be the need, increasingly, to use that little capital we have very efficiently. And again, to allocate that capital efficiently, we need to be guided by science. That's absolutely key. Yet, there is a challenge. Science might complicate things. This fund that I just mentioned to you, Quali, this 250 million, took me 4 years to set it up. It's very long. It took a lot of patience, and we can't afford that. The urgency is key. Why it took so long? It's because every single stakeholder have their own scientific requirements. So there is not a real standardization. So the Green Climate Fund asks us these requirements, the European Commission, some others, institutional investors, others. So what I'm saying is that science can complicate things. So there is absolutely need for standardization. So use science, yes, but let's be sure that science does not complicate things and doesn't stop at no analysis by paralysis, right? Or that's the way you say, I think. So that's also extremely, extremely important. So this is the challenge. So again, science is an enabler, it's a common language, it's a way to build blended finance structure, and it's very important right now, but let's be sure that we use science appropriately and in a standardized way. So in the next hour, we will collectively explore innovative ideas, identify concrete barriers, and hopefully co-create actionable pathways forward. This is what I had really had to share with you. Let's try to challenge conventional thinking. I think I was very keen to see around the room people with very diverse kind of backgrounds, and I think the problems we have at hand, they do require a strong. Well, this work has been going on for a number of years, but I think it's very important. This radical collaboration among very different. So, as the panel said, let's break the mold. Let's break the mold because really millions of lives really depend on getting this right. Thank you very much.
Take your seats, please. Good morning, everybody. My name is Daniel Stander. Hopefully you can all hear me loudly and clearly. What I would like to do now is have a conversation with all of you. I don't want to moderate a panel, and I don't want us to speechify and talk at you. What I want is... I'll keep speaking. Is it that? Catch. I'll keep talking. Let me know, wave at the back if you can hear me okay. Thank you. I want to have a conversation with you guys. I want some energy in the room. We're all here because there are problems to solve. We're not here to listen to people, pitch ideas, or tell you what they already think or what we already know. There are lots of people in the room that I recognize. There are loads of people in the room that I don't recognize. That is a good thing. Can we bring to this our best thinking, our best ideas? Let's celebrate all the things that we know work, but let's celebrate the things that we don't, the things that we don't know and where the gaps are. Can we also please identify perhaps who might not be in the room, who needs to be in the room, and how we get them in the room to drive the change we wish to see, how we're going to influence them, and how we're going to carry this conversation forward. I say it's a conversation, but I'm not really interested in conversations. I'm interested in action. Storytelling is important, but story doing is much more important. I like systems thinkers. I like to think I am one myself, but I much prefer systems doers. So what I want to come out of this is actually something we can carry forward. I really like this hub. I really like this resilience brand that has been created thanks to the Race to Resilience that started at Glasgow. It's a great convening power. What's going to come next and next and next so that we can drive the change we wish to see? We've got great people here to speak with us, but we've also got other people in the room. We've got someone scribing and trying to turn what we say into something visual that we can take away. We've got poets in the room who are going to try and inspire us by synthesizing what it is they hear. I've got a throwable mic, which I'm going to use, and I want it to be chucked around so everybody can join this conversation. Just when you speak, very briefly, name, affiliation, and let's keep our interventions brief. And this conversation involves all of you, even the people at the back who are still typing on their laptops. They're going to step up. In fact, I'm going to ask you all to stand up right now. So everybody on your feet. If you're an introvert, don't worry. It's safe. Okay? The reason I'm doing this is because as I came in, somebody came to me and said, I don't know anything about finance. I'm not a finance expert. And then we hear from someone who spends his life in finance. So I just want to try and get a sense of the room so we can have a conversation where we meet you all where we are. So some really simple questions. If you feel you know the answer to the question, stay standing. Okay, let me think of a question. I'll start with an easy one. If you feel comfortable that you know the difference between finance and funding, stay standing. If you're not sure, sit down. Didn't lose, okay, good. Didn't lose many people. Next question. Okay, governments really only have 3 ways that they can finance something. If you feel you know what those 3 ways are, stay standing. If you're not sure, sit down. Okay, that's interesting. Wow, okay. So, basically you can raise taxpayers' money, you can borrow more, or if you're really lucky, you can get grants. That's fundamentally it. Last question then. If you feel confident that you can define what blended finance is, we started to hear a little bit about that. Okay, thank you. I know I said I wasn't going to pick on anybody, but would anybody like to define blended finance for me? Throwable mic? Well, you sat down.
Well, I didn't know the government one.
Okay. Everybody else sit down. Just say your name affiliation.
So Hannah Woods at These for Development. I'm going to have a go, right? So blended finance is essentially where you're using different types of financing to fund different projects and different parts of projects and different things.
Okay, I'm going to ask what types of financing, because it's two. Over there. Big throw. Public and private. So essentially, capital that needs a market return and capital that is concessional and is willing to take less than a market return. And bringing those two together fundamentally is what a blended finance is. Thank you. I thought that was helpful for me to get a gauge of where we are in the room. And if at any time you want to come in, wave at me and we'll bring you in. I would like to start with the panel. And I'm going to ask you a question. And I would like, if you can limit yourself to a one-sentence answer, challenging. I'm actually not going to do introductions because I'm assuming you've read the agenda and you're here because of the agenda and it says people's names behind them. But I'm going to start with Ariana and I'll go down the line. I think my question is going to be something like, if there's one thing you could unlock to scale finance into community resilience, what would that one thing be? Ariana.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. I would want to unlock a better understanding of what resilience for last mile communities on the front lines of the climate crisis really looks like for holders of concessional finance.
Understanding what community resilience means at the last mile. Thank you. Sam.
Similar. I would like to unlock a greater understanding of the value of local knowledge and the potential for local innovation.
Excellent. Make sure we unlock the knowledge that already exists on the ground. Shehnaaz.
My one sentence, I mean, it's similar to theirs, but it's more around the financiers acknowledging the deep knowledge base that is at the community level.
Mm-hmm. So not just understanding what resilience means and that there is local knowledge, but respecting and acknowledging that local knowledge from the top down, from the financiers.
Yeah, absolutely.
That sounds to me a lot like trust.
Yeah, it is trust. Yeah.
Patricia.
Sorry.
Thank you. I guess I'll carry on from Luca's comments. The one thing I would do is try to convince institutional investors, pension funds, endowments, foundations, philanthropy to lean in a lot more to blended finance. Right now, the pool of blended finance from those institutions is fairly limited.
Thank you. So, guys, you're in this conversation too. So the question I just posed to the panel is now being posed to you. I'm going to give you a second to think, but if you have something you wish to contribute that we need to unlock, not just through this discussion, but going forward so we can get some takeaways, it's understanding what resilience means, respecting that there is in fact local knowledge there, and often the people on the ground know best, making sure we trust that understanding and having more types of capital and capital providers come into a blended finance ecosystem. What else needs to be unlocked? I'm going to go there first because he was a little bit quicker. Just name, affiliation, what needs to be unlocked, one sentence, please, and then Annie.
Chris Lee from Climate Australia. So I think the key thing for me is how do we, Luca talked about a 4-year cycle. It's really, and I hear that all the time, how do we lower that transaction cost and get those things happening much more quickly?
Can I just clarify, that 4-year cycle is the investment return cycle or the time to investment?
The time to build this fund.
Time to build the fund.
Time to build the fund. So we need to accelerate how quickly capital is mobilized into vehicles that can be deployed. Yeah, I hope the scribe is getting this because this is good stuff. Let's go, Annie. Okay, let's pass it to Annie gently.
Annie from TreeAid. I think we need to mainstream what high-integrity investment looks like, both for concessional and private sector investment, to drive resilience on the ground.
I would like you to explain that because I'm not sure everybody knows what you mean by high integrity.
Yeah, sure. So what we work a lot with carbon investment at the moment, and so high integrity means what is actually going to create impactful change on the ground that leads to resilience for ecosystems and people, not just for return on investment.
So I think that's really interesting, especially because you mentioned the carbon angle. If we're going to be driving investment that's allegedly going to deliver results, what we really don't want is carbon credits that don't materialize. So there's lots that we need to do to make sure integrity is there to give the investors confidence, but essentially to give society confidence that we're going to deliver. See, I'm going to leave you out, Luca, because I've got other voices. Nice to see you, Mark. Catch, and then back to that lady over there, please.
Yeah, I would say we need to unlock tolerance for an impact model that is systems-wide, that it brings in different actors across the system, and benefits may go to specific communities, but no one group captures all the benefits. So we need to sort of move away from single point sort of impact actions into a more systems-wide way of looking at investing and understanding impacts of it.
Thank you. That speaks to my heart as someone who likes to think holistically and for co-benefits. Let's go to the lady in the khaki olive dress over there. Who's waving at you? Keep going, keep going. Wave, stand up and wave, because Mark clearly can't see you.
I guess understanding what the minimum measurements and indicators are to attract finance. Resilient projects, I work in the health systems space, so that's kind of what's on my mind. If you apply to anything really,
Good. Thank you. Super important, and we can go, and that unlocks a lot of things, getting that data right, not just to underpin the integrity, not just to quantify co-benefits and make sure they're realized, but to mobilize capital in the first place. Anybody, can we go to the lady over there who just put her hand up, please? Oh, okay. In that case, speak up, and we're going to replace the ball with a real mic. And I'm going to ask my panel, I hope you're listening carefully because you're going to have to respond to all of these.
Yes. Hi, I'm Anju Sharma from the Global Center on Adaptation. And I think what we really need is a greater risk appetite from funders.
Thank you.
And donors.
Yes, as someone who spent a lot of time helping institutions define their risk appetites and risk tolerance, getting them to change that is not easy, but good. I'll take one more if there is one more. All the way, two more. One in the second row, and the gentleman earlier who helped me with my definition of concessional finance, please.
Samantha Sharp from the Institute for Sustainable Futures at University of Technology, Sydney. We had two of the panellists talk about the importance of local knowledge, and we also had Luca talking about how science provides this mechanism for communication, but science traditionally doesn't have good ways of systematically integrating local knowledge.
Excellent point. I also would add that science can sometimes get in the way of communication when it gets a little bit too wonky. And how do we have this conversation in a way that mobilizes rather than confuses or becomes politicized?
Thank you. Christopher Decky from the Environmental Defense Fund. I think what we need to unlock really is the ability of Global South, of developing country governments to be able to raise their own revenue without worrying so much about illicit financial flows, or the fact that so much of the potential tax revenue is being shipped to the global north or to the economic core in some way. So that's what I would say. We need to be paying attention to some of the work that's happening now in the UN Tax Convention, for example, or the Solidarity Fund work. So just ways of allowing developing countries to mobilize their own capital and revenue for things that their democratic society believes is important.
Thank you. And I'm just reminded of some other conversations that I've come from recently with a bunch of mayors in Africa who were, on the one hand, keen to mobilize these external sources of funds, but worried about a fatigue or a laziness that may set in if you become overly dependent on external sources of revenue. Guys, lots there. You provided us with a lot to start with, and I was really pleased we did that because it opened up a whole new set of conversations around potentially the challenge between science and local, or the importance for high integrity, making sure we're using good data to unlock co-benefits, to increase the speed with which we're setting up these funds. We talked about some of the things we want to get unlocked. At some level, they could feel a little bit negative. Well, woe is me, there's so much on us here. But you're doing it at the front line and you're seeing what's working. So could you possibly reflect on what we've heard and maybe bring to the table examples from your own experiences which are working, if we could unlock it more, and some of these unlocks, what would actually help you scale? And just wave at me who wants to go first, because I don't really mind. I'm not surprised, Patricia. Trust in North
I
America.
love my examples, so I will go first. And I want to echo something about the risk appetite. I do think sometimes there's this perception of higher risk than there is. And I think that the conversation, and I'm sure, Luca, for 4 years you had this conversation, that you do need the concessional part of that stack, but actually the return usually comes much faster than you expect. The repayments are usually much faster, and the defaults are usually much less because it's coupled with technical assistance. And I think this is, to me, it's a little bit crazy that I used to work for the IFC 10 years ago, and IFC started this 20 years ago, where coupling technical assistance with concessional finance leads to very low default rates. And so I do find it frustrating that there isn't more capital coming, despite a lot of the evidence we already have. So I will quickly go into an example. So one example I wanted to share, we have about 100 projects in 40 countries. We do a lot of, we did a lot of USAID work. And one of the examples I wanted to share was a project we did in Nigeria. It was a 5-year project, $16 million. And it was part of the Feed the Future program. I know some of you know about this. It essentially provided technical assistance and concessional finance to 2.5 million smallholder farmers. And these were on the front lines at the last mile. So we trained intermediary agents that provide extension services, and 75,000 of them reached 2.5 million farmers. We took the 16 million and leveraged that by about 4 times. We had about $65 million financed from Union Bank, FCMB, and other banks in Nigeria. And the idea was that there were a lot of unbanked smallholder farmers, really the last mile. And how do you incentivize agents or service providers who provide inputs, seed, nutrition to the crops? How do you incentivize them to go? So what we did is we, with the concessional finance from the US government, provided guarantees and offtake agreements for those intermediaries, allowing them to provide seed, nutrients, crops to the farmers. We used low-cost capital to guarantee the offtakes, and the agriculture extension agents felt comfortable giving the inputs to the farmers. There were almost 0 defaults, and the incredible story is that of those 2.5 million smallholder farmers who are now connected by technology and continue to receive loans, credit, the agents now know how to use credit methods with their farmers, they had over $2 billion in sales. The goal was 300 million, and we reached 2 billion. So it was one example of, by providing first loss capital to the banks, we proved a model whereby now, the project ended this year. Luckily, we got it under the radar before they could cancel it. We proved a model whereby, by providing technology and technical assistance, it can now be a sustainable model on its own. And there was no loss.
So I would like other panelists to maybe build on that as examples of where we've seen concessional finance help unlock something to scale. The before I allow you to, I just want to make a point that I would like actually to be captured, not necessarily by Scribera, but whoever's taking this forward. There was a question earlier, or a point earlier, about risk tolerance and changing the risk tolerance. And I said that's hard to do. In fact, I don't think it's anybody's place to change someone else's risk tolerance. It's actually quite a personal thing, or if it's at a corporate level, it's set for good reasons. What we can change, though, is people's perception of risk. Right? So I think that's where we need to focus our efforts. And I would say a couple of things, if I may, because I know I'm not a panelist, I'm not supposed to be speaking, I'm supposed to be moderating, but actually the risk is a lot lower than people think it is, but when it's in a far-off place or a difficult place to do business, then it gets loaded. So we need to help people understand that things are not as risky as they think they are. The second thing I think we need to understand is that actually community lending, historically, is super reliable. I have had experiences of it with collectives, local collectives, and the risk of default is almost zero because of the level of community accountability between those individuals. But that's poorly understood and poorly reflected in the risk models that then go into evaluating any opportunity. So I wonder whether it's not necessarily the risk tolerance and the risk appetite that needs changing, but actually the perception of risk, because these opportunities are not as risky as they appear. Third point is, even though something is, even though you could recharacterize the risk will remain. There's nothing that's zero risk. There's never a non-zero probability of something bad happening. And that's where I think some of this stuff needs to be blended, but blended with risk capital as well. So with public markets, with private markets, and then a little bit of insurance capital as well to take the risk away from those investors. So when we are talking about concessional finance or blended finance, and we said earlier public-private, I think your model is probably going to be public-private and some risk capital to de-risk, because as good a job as we do helping people understand and recharacterize what the risk is, there's always going to be some there, and that's where the insurance industry can act as an enabler. Apologies for making a point, but I think that's worth carrying forward as we go to COP and as we go to other convenings, so we get the right people in the room. Who would like to build, Shehnaaz would, on what works in addressing these unblocks, please?
Yeah, and if it's okay, I'd just like to tell a bit of a personal story that's because my sense is that this thing about funding resilience is not new. So I grew up in South Africa under apartheid more than 30 years ago. I'm still quite young. And I grew up on what was there, and it's still called the Cape Flats. It's not very nice, nothing grows there, etc. What the community, and I'd like to tag onto this thing about the community trust and the way that plans were made, etc. So, for example, for someone like me, there was absolutely no way I would end up at university if it was left to my family, or because there were no bursaries being offered to people of color, let alone women of color who want to go and study engineering. The community then got together, and for them, building resilience to stand up against apartheid looked like educating young people. Because the sense then was that these young people could then get into the systems and build resilience of the communities. I was one of the lucky few that got funded by the community with the intention that once I started working, I had to give back to the community, and I had to make a difference in making sure that the lever on apartheid got shifted. There were no contracts signed, and to this day, I still walk around with that I give back to the community, that there's others that we support in building their resilience, and now it's not resilience against apartheid, but resilience against climate change. And the same model has worked, and I think there needs to be more recognition for communities' agency, as well as the fact that most resilience currently and adaptation is being funded by the communities themselves. And often there is no defaulting on the loans, especially if they are given to women. There are mechanisms in place where money gets pooled, etc. And so thinking, and what I was quite taken aback by, but maybe I shouldn't be, by the comments from the audience, it was all through a financier's lens. I probably maybe only heard one from the community lens. And so my sense is that we need to highlight that agency. We need to ensure that those with the money, so the communities also have money, I think we mustn't forget that, but that those with the additional funding understand the agency that the community sits with and the trust that lives there. Thank you. I mean, that was a bit of a passionate, but for me, it's a lived experience.
Yeah, and all the truer for it. And I think there's something there about trusting the community and trusting them over the long term and being patient and trusting to know that they will deliver for you. Sam or Ariana first, and then Sam, please.
Yeah, just to build a little bit on what Shehnaaz and Patricia were saying. So I work for an organization called GiveDirectly. We use mobile money technology to deliver cash transfers directly to households living in poverty, in extreme poverty, and primarily in sub-Saharan Africa. And what I would like to kind of share or build on is essentially that, we spoke about the fact that, this last mile kind of potential consumers or customers of finance are unbanked, and this is sort of a main challenge. But the mobile money revolution has really opened up a level of infrastructure and technological possibilities to reach people directly with capital that is unprecedented and never seen before. And what GiveDirectly is trying to do, for example, with our work where we deliver large lump sum transfers, so about $1,000 a household typically, is provide households who are living on the front lines of the climate crisis. So that might look like extreme contexts of drought, cyclical floods in northern Kenya and Uganda. It might look like people who have experienced a cyclone and then a flood and their whole communities have washed away in southern Malawi. The opportunity to receive an unconditional grant through direct payments to then make the decisions, make the choices, the investments that they need to make to build resilience. And this doesn't mean that the very well-intentioned and science-based interventions around training, providing inputs, providing sort of agri-tech for sustainable livelihoods, et cetera, are unfounded, but it does mean that oftentimes the people that we're trying to target with these interventions are extremely, extremely poor and need capital to make basic investments as well, including, for example, building sturdier household materials, sending their kids to school, maybe buying a motorcycle and starting a small transport business to the local market, and what have you. So I think that's one thing that's worth noting as well.
What I really like there, amongst other things, I have two things. One, you brought technology into the room, and it hadn't been discussed before, and we're being kindly hosted by Bentley. So let's acknowledge that maybe there are some more technology firms, and technology is a big class of industry that need to be in this conversation. But there was something else that you brought in, and you talked about unconditional grants, as opposed to grants that come with some capacity building assistance based on some understanding of delivery. And I don't think it's either or. I think it's understanding when we need which and how we put the two together. Because there are times when we want to trust that community to know what it needs to get done and just empower them. And there will be times when actually the skills and the capacity is not there and they recognize that too and they want assistance. And so some of the loans, as opposed to grants, may come with some obligations. And I think it's a case of horses for courses, making sure we have all of the tools available to us and we deploy the right ones in the right situations. Sam, unlock us, please, with your experience.
Yeah, thank you. So I just got back from a place called Ngole in Tanzania, which is a place with all sorts of different risks, but also lots of opportunities. And it's part of a project called Valuing Variability in Arid and Semi-Arid Landscapes. And the idea of this is to recognize that given rainfall is always changing in this arid landscape, but also they're right next to a national park, and every other year, even every year, elephants leave the park and chew up half of the crop. So climate actually isn't the main risk. It's making everything else much worse. And the reason that we're able to get to the bottom of all of these different dynamics threatening the community is through participatory planning tools and approaches. And maybe they're a little bit old school in a sort of technology center, but getting down with the community, giving them the space to articulate what the needs are, what the risks are, and what isn't going to work. So really interesting. In Tanzania, there's this huge push for irrigation. Nobody mentioned it. All workshop, even though this is a part farming, part pastoralist community. And at the end, we said, why is nobody talking about this? They said it doesn't work here. The source isn't appropriate. The water's not quite right. The government tried it. It was really expensive to fix. We don't want irrigation. It's going to be a waste of time. And actually, it took 2 or 3 days to get to that little kernel of something that the policy planners at central level can't recognize and aren't able to. Where the gap is being able to turn those participatory planning processes and connect them into the concessional financing. And that's what's not worked yet, but it's what we're trying to build, is a collective of different organizations, whether they're financial institutions, technical advice, community representatives, who can bridge that participatory planning and local knowledge to the finance, and having that group of intermediaries as a collective that can be the trustworthy bit that holds it all together.
Yeah, that really important add, I think, to the conversation there. I'm buying a little bit of time for everybody in the room because I would like you guys to start reflecting on what you've heard and join this conversation. I think that the importance there is this participatory planning process, which I think I just repeated correctly. And it's one thing to have local knowledge. It's another thing to want to accelerate the time with which it takes to create the fund. It's another thing to change the risk appetite or the risk profile, but really what we need to fund and be patient for is the permission to run those processes. I have some experiences of that from other grants that I'm involved in, where it really is community-led resilience, and it only works if it's place-based and you have a deep understanding of your situation. And it's one thing to say the knowledge exists. It's another thing to then build consensus in the community about exactly what we need to do, when and how, and make sure all the stakeholders, public, private, whatever, are engaged. So let's not ride roughshod over the hard yards that need to be done with that participatory planning process. So we started with some things that needed to be unlocked. We heard from people doing this work on the ground about what is working, and hopefully some inspiration of what we could scale if we get it right. I said at the beginning I want this to be a conversation with all of you, and I know I brought you in somewhat artificially at the beginning, but you're still part of this conversation. So catch my eye if you want to say anything at any point, or indeed now. Is there anything that you've heard that you think you want to build on? Anything that's been missing that you've experienced that you think could help us unlock? Or maybe some of the blockers that were identified to begin with that we're not unblocking through these examples? I'm going to go to the lady with the jacket and the green blouse underneath, and then to the other lady behind.
Yeah, sorry if I'm making another comment again. Sophie Punter from LifeLinks. My belief is that the best way to get funding in is if you demonstrate the benefits that the receiver brings. And I think the discussions are very much presented as communities as vulnerable, as someone in need. And most communities are part of a supply chain: farming, medicines, mining. And if we're able to link those communities to supply chains that rich countries, rich companies depend upon, can we use those to leverage finance to help those communities build resilience? It's in the self-interest of Western countries, multinationals. And I think that opportunity, at the moment, I don't see it yet. And I wonder if you see that opportunity too.
I really like that point. As the mic is moving back a little bit further, we talked about, or at least I brought in systems thinking. I want to understand entire value chains, and somebody also brought up essentially beneficiaries, and making sure we know who all the beneficiaries are from all of the co-benefits. Only then can we fully articulate the value to those participants, some of whom may be domestic and local, some of whom may be international. So the mic has gone. There was a lady waving at me over there in the chair. Sorry. Thank you.
Hi, thanks. My name's Juliet Milliken. I work for an organisation called Realliance. All of you have spoken about working with the poorest of the poor and with small farmers, and it's great to hear what you just said, Sam. We know that large financing organisations don't have the time to deliver small grants, that they take a lot of time and a lot of energy. I'm sure I'm not the only person in the room who works for a brokering organisation with a network of local partners who offer capacity building where we need it, who have participatory tools, and who dispense small amounts of money around the world. One of the big problems we have is, of course, money transfers and money getting lost. Takes a huge amount of our time. That's a big issue that we need to pay attention to. Trying to transfer 500 quid to Bangladesh has taken hours and hours of staff time bouncing it back between banks. important thing to take account of. But Sam, can we have a chat at lunchtime? And can other financiers get in touch with those of us who do this work on the ground with local partners for very tiny overheads?
Thank you very much. Anybody else want to come in? Sorry, Lauren, all the way down here, and then we'll go in the middle, if that's okay. Oh, and then a third. Thank you.
Thanks. It's Chris Kelly from Practical Action. Just really struck by the dichotomy we have, a lot of focus on science, Luca, at the beginning, and how science is the enabler and the answer. And then we've got a non-traditional view of science, I suppose, kind of community participation, community engagement that came across very strongly from our panel. And it's just getting those two views to kind of be talking the same language. I think that's my observation.
Yeah, great observation. And I wonder whether this is in fact the traditional view of science. The community may know best. Let's move along the line. The lady in the middle here, and then there was a gentleman behind, please.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Aisha. I'm from CADLAS, but today I want to ask a question from my perspective as someone from a small island in the Caribbean. I'm from Barbados. And I was just listening to the panel discussion, and a lot of the examples you gave, the scale of the projects have been massive, obviously. So the thing about the Caribbean is we have trouble attracting concessional finance for a number of reasons. Mainly, we're heavily indebted countries, primarily import-based, tourism-based economies. As you know, we are very climate vulnerable, and we have a really small population. So my question is, obviously the scale of the projects that can happen in the Caribbean are pretty small, and we have very high adaptation needs. What role can blended finance play, and how can we attract blended finance to help fund adaptation in the Caribbean?
Thank you.
Or other small island developing states around the world.
Really important point. As the microphone goes back over your left shoulder, I just want to say, I think some of these interventions have been quite localized and quite small, and some have been at scale. But I think your point is an important one, thinking about the investor, the private investor in this, they want scale, and even the public investor wants scale of impact. So how do we get to scale?
Hi, I am Usman. I'm the CEO and co-founder of this company called Acclimate. I'm based out of Kenya. I used to live in London in private equity space, pivoted away from that for a long time ago. One of the things I learned while I was here in private equity, and my roots are in Pakistan, that's where I grew up, was that despite an angel investor in this multi-billion-dollar private equity fund being from Pakistan, they never invested there. Why? Risk perception, exactly what you said. It didn't matter what the data said, it didn't matter what the companies were, it didn't matter anything. I remember one of the partners went to Pakistan, it's like, wow, I went and landed in Islamabad, which is a 4 million person city, a village in my eyes. And they were terrified. For what reason, I don't know. I go there, I see golf courses, he went there, he felt nervous, right? That risk perception is not going to go away unless the right people are in the room. And that's my realization over the past 10 years. So question maybe for the panelists is like, yes, besides the justice component of having representation and equality, there's deep knowledge, local knowledge, whatever you want to call it, that exists in people who are from the places. They know how to navigate the social, political, economy, risk perceptions themselves. They should be in the room more. How do you get them? Why hasn't that moved forward as much? It's question number one. Maybe comment number one. Second, I also serve on the board of this participatory development organization and on this private sector natural insecticide agriculture company in Kenya. A lot of that comes together in like climate finance and some of the different challenges of like this big agribusiness needs bigger financing, this local participatory knowledge needs a different kind of financing. I find myself wearing these multiple hats and wondering how to solve these problems, and neither of them have clear answers while they're scaling very well. So I want to put that forward, like as someone who's navigating these three different worlds quite often. I still struggle to find the right people to talk to. It almost seems like everyone has a conversation to be had, but the action doesn't always follow. So I don't know how to answer that question or even posit this question because that's a struggle we have consistently. And I'm sure all of you agree to many different levels, but I'll pause there because I know I've shared a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. I will take two more, and then I'm going to try and bring it back. So can we come forward to, I'm trying to read your name on your name badge, to Sophia, and then we'll go back a little bit. So Sophia first.
Hi, I'm Sophia from LSE, and I studied history. And one thing you see a problem with multilateral development funds is sometimes the idea that it is developed countries telling developing countries what to do and providing funds conditionally, sometimes for good reasons. And my question is, we've talked a lot about the perception of risk from the investor's side, but what are sometimes the obstacles from the community in their perceptions of how this is going to work? Is there, in your experience, has there ever been hesitation from their side, and how do you fix that? Thank you.
And then let's go back a few rows. And I'm going to come to the panel afterwards, and my question, so you can be preparing, is in response to this, what do you need to see happening differently from those that are providing the finance to help you scale your work?
Hi, my name is Lynn, and with a company called Pollination. I actually have a case study of blended finance to share with the audience, as well as kind of a couple call to action in response to the lady's point around, how blended finance can be better leveraged to support small island developing states, the SIDS, in many contexts where, the many projects needs are very small and the transaction cost of blended finance is quite high. So at Pollination, we're currently working with climate fund managers, MUFG, the GCF, and FinDev Canada on this fund called GAWA, which is a global adaptation-focused fund, and I believe UNDP, C40, and many other CSOs are also involved in the process. So I would just echo, Luca, your point earlier in terms of, the long horizon is needed to establish blended funds. I think in Gaia's case, it also took 4 years, and we're reaching first close this week with $480 million to deploy. So then now comes the challenge of finding projects to actually invest. And making sure that we're deploying capital into the right places. So in Gaia's instance, we have a 25% mandate to invest in SIDS as well as LDCs in countries that we have kind of targeted. But the issue is, it's really difficult to work even with a network of, global and local institutions to really find the projects that are bankable with high standards of impact and integrity. So maybe this is just a call for action in terms of, how can we better work together to unearth those projects and build a better bankable pipeline for adaptation and resilience for investors to more effectively deploy capital.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to see Gaia coming to fruition. I was around the table in Sharm when we were trying to get it off the ground. So thank you for your persistence. And one of the things that was, in fact, identified very early on in that process was it's one thing to raise the capital. It's another thing to have that bankable portfolio of projects to invest in. And maybe that can be something that we note that needs to come out of this to match capital that I hope is hungry for projects that deliver impact. Without that, we're not going to get very far. Guys, what do you need to see from the investment community to scale your work? Oh, Sam, you were first.
Thanks. Well, I'll try and maybe pick up on a couple of comments. You mentioned about the history and reticence from communities. I mean, certainly in northern Tanzania, this is an area where false promises are made all the time. NGOs come, they do some research, they disappear. And even government loans, the government has tried giving loans to communities to invest in agriculture, and the communities sometimes just keep it and say, well, you're the government, you gave me some money, I'm having that, and it never gets paid back because they know government's probably not going to do anything about it. So how do you manage that first? And also, just to add that the process is a little bit different. If you're a community and you've been on the receiving end of grants all the time, it's different when you're now going, here's my business idea, I'm now going to go out and find some money for a business plan. And that requires trust in the mediators of that process. So the strategy that we're using is to go make sure that we're offering something first that's concrete, a public good investment. It could be a water source or rainwater harvesting. And then start to say, okay, now let's work together to start attracting investment in the local innovation. So that's one part of it. I think another thing that we need on the investment side, and more widely, is a recognition that you have to walk before you can run. I don't think you can just go straight out for the venture capital. I think we're starting by thinking, first we've got some grant money, can we use that to bring in philanthropic capital behind one of these business plans? Let's try it and test it, and then once we've got some learning, then we can say, okay, now let's start moving out to impact investing. And give more time for that. And I think the reality is it just takes time, particularly if you're working with communities that are not used to this sort of approach. They're typically underserved by government. Recognizing that patient really does mean patient. That's not a little extension on what we might normally wait for to see a return. That means a real long-term investment in community resilience. And that is, I think it's going to take time, but that's where transformation lies. It doesn't happen quickly.
So a request for more patience. In my own career, I've been involved in a lot of first ofs or past Pathfinder projects, things that are pilots. They don't always scale and they don't always lead to the next. And maybe some of it's patience, but also I think some of it is telling the story correctly about who were the beneficiaries, what the impact was, how do we evidence that in a way that is compelling. Patricia, Shehnaaz, would you like any of you come in with you have the mic. What do you need to see differently from the finance community?
So reflecting, for me, there's two things that stand out. The one is this definition of bankable projects, because often it's very tangible, and I think to expand that a bit, which won't be easy, but to start including intangibles, such as trust, such as so things that you can't directly measure, but that start getting built in the long term. And the second is to be very aware of the context that you're going into. So, for example, there's lots of talk about insurance, whereas in many communities, people see that as a big taboo. So the two are expanding what the definition of bankability and a deep respect and understanding of context.
I guess I have two things. So one would be, I think the next 5 years, we're projected to have about $1.5 trillion deficit of climate finance going into developing countries. So it's, yes, they have their own finance, and over the long term with tax reforms, hopefully we can get there, but we have a 2030 target and we need about $1 trillion a year. Major governments are scaling back, so ODA next year is supposed to be down 30%. I don't know if everyone saw the news this morning that now the European countries are being asked to provide 5% of GDP to defense, which as soon as I hear that, I think, oh my God, right, less ODA. So I think we're gonna be hit with a perfect storm where we need a complete revolution in the way endowments of foundations, we need more Bill Gates, right? We need them to say, in the next 20 years, I'm spending down $200 billion. Or in the next 10 years, we're gonna accelerate and pay out 10% of our endowment versus 5%. I think we need a radical shift in the amount of finance. And I also think you need to shift down in the capital stack from where you are. So if you are blended finance at a low, very low debt rate, then just go to completely concessional and to a grant, right? And start thinking maybe a little bit differently. If you're, I help with our endowment, and we used to always be like, we have to be in the A shares. Maybe we move to the B shares, right? And you start to shift. Given the crisis, we need to have a different perception. Like you said, the institution needs to change their perception of what return is. And it may not always be a number, it may be a co-benefit. And then the other quick thing, I want to just respond to the comment about private sector. I 100% agree. One of the things that we do is we work with multinationals. We're a nonprofit. We work with multinationals to decarbonize their supply chain. And one of the things that we've done specifically with Nestle is we've done 400 insetting projects with them, where they inset within their supply chain to build more resilient supply chain throughout their whole supply chain. So I think that's a huge opportunity to get more companies to think about the resiliency of their supply chain, and then they invest in their supply chain and fund those projects from their own internal capital.
Thanks, Patricia. Really good points. In terms of who needs to be in the room and who may not be in the room, as we take this conversation forward, let's make sure philanthropy is here, and let's do what we can to encourage that conversation about shifting down the stack or moving entirely to unrestricted, unconditional, because that's what needs to happen. Did you want to say something, Ariana?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I won't add much more, but just to maybe state the obvious or the elephant in the room, which is that we also just need so much more of overall climate finance to go to adaptation. I mean, it's kind of crazy, actually, that where we are, where about 5 to 10% of overall climate finance is still only being channeled to adaptation, and the rest is going to mitigation, which, of course, we need to be looking at kind of solutions to mitigate the climate crisis. But that's one maybe thing that I would also add, and maybe one more is my experience, and I mostly raise funding from grants, has been that the climate adaptation space is very splintered and fragmented across sectors and themes and objectives and KPIs, and that's something that's endemic, I think, to the broader aid sector. But the livelihoods people want to see livelihoods outcomes, the health people want to see the health outcomes, the food people, And the fact of the matter is that the climate crisis is multifaceted, and one sort of, again, flood washes away your home, and there goes your health, there goes your education, there goes your home, there goes your livelihood. And just sort of taking a step back and moving above and beyond our kind of, KPI-driven nature and how we look at funding things, I think is really urgently needed.
I'm really pleased you made that point, because it was also on the tip of my tongue that although we're here at London Climate Week, climate is intersectional. I'm pleased that the London School of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene is in the room, because it's a health issue. I understand it's also a food issue. Sometimes it's a transportation issue, but to your point earlier, it's also a security issue. When either locally it's causing civil unrest or internationally it's driving migration, these are things that unravel the fabric of our society. So even if dollars are now flowing in other directions, I think we all need to be agile enough to articulate the climate crisis as a health crisis, as a food crisis, and as a national security crisis. And I think it behooves us to be agile in that way. With an eye on the clock, I'm going to say, hot poets, get ready. That's like your 3-minute warning to do your thing. I'm going to try and rap, but rap with the floor. Meaning, my question to you all is, what is it that you want to see us carry forward at the next convening when we meet again at COP? What's the call to action that the Resilience Hub and the team can make sure gets reported on, and that they drive energy towards as we go forward over the next 3 months? So let me look at that. I'm going to look at Luca first, and even Cibele, who's in the room from our must-knows. If you have anything to say, we'll go there first. And then a gentleman over there. Well, I want calls to action now to wrap, please. So Luca first.
Yes, I want to be sure that we don't see a dichotomy between, top-down kind of investment approach and community-based. I think there is not. We all need each other. And I think the missing link in this conversation, it would be great to have this in the room at COP, is community-based finance institutions, responsible ones, because they can be the link. They are the link. In the fund we raise, we basically invest in microfinance institutions for the most part, and then those are the ones that have the community links and deliver the capital where it's most needed. So I think those are a very, very important part. Have to be a conversation. And in Race to Resilience, there is one initiative which is called Scale for Resilience, which is we are in fact a community of microfinance institutions and investors and other practitioners to really be able to ensure that these microfinance institutions deliver climate solutions to the most vulnerable.
Thank you. In my experience, super important. An HSBC will find it really hard to invest in something super local without that local institution, microfinance institution, that it can trust to defray some of that risk, essentially to take on some of that risk, because they know that community firsthand and they have a good appreciation of the risk profile. Cibele, is there anything you want to add based on the must-knows? You don't have to, just give you the opportunity.
Yeah, so I would just like to say, first, that I appreciate the comments between the tension between science and traditional knowledge. I think that there is a tension, and we scientists for sure have been not very good in sort of integrating existing traditional knowledge. But I also see that it is changing. There is a lot of science today that is co-produced, that is like making that step. And I think that the value, and I think this is word for everything that we are talking about here. It's like the value is actually to address where the tension is. So like, it's at the tension that we can learn more with each other. So I would like to see more of those conversations at the Resilience Hub, more conversations between people that don't agree with each other. You know, I think that maybe we here in the room have different opinions, but we're still part of the same community. But it would be good to actually bring in the real tensions. That's where we sort of like learn more. I heard a lot of things that relate to several of the must-knows. I just wanted to make one last comment. It's not necessarily about must-know, but it's about scale, and it's a little bit of a challenge also, because I think when we're talking about scale, I see like the tension between the speed of investment. I see the tension between sort of like the need for scaling up solutions and showing that they can be scalable, but actually scale can mean very different things. And some of the things that you were, scale does not necessarily mean to reach out to more or to grow, but it can mean to reach deep. And I think that many of the things that you were talking about, even about risk perception and sort of, they are about scaling deep. It's about mind shifts. So that's a challenge for COP.
Thank you. As the mic moves back to the gentleman over there who's going to give us, luckily, our final call to action, Poets Get Ready. I love the idea of facing into the tension, and I loved your point of scale as depth, almost brought some spirituality into the room. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. I'm Daniel Morell. I'm the founder and CEO of Balance Eco. So my question is that there's two messages coming from the panel. One is the hurry up and wait, and the other is the we really need immediate action. So the idea is, how do we expedite the immediate action and bring forward the hurry up and wait in terms of getting project ready? And my suggestion is that there's a three-pillared approach to this issue. One is to combine biodiversity with human rights and social economic well-being, co-benefits, combined with a retired, verified tonnage of carbon. And what would one think of that approach?
Thank you for the call to action to address the tension between the hurry up and wait and at the same time mobilize quickly. I can see food has arrived, which I'm personally very grateful for. I'm going to ask the panelists to stay and invite the poets to come and riff and then send us with your wise words into some food, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We have been sitting at the back, absorbing as much as is possible. We haven't read each other's, so there may be some overlap, because that's just sort of natural, but we'll see what happens. Liv's going to start, I'll do a bit.
Just to context this, Chris has just said you do the start and the beginning, so I've just whacked mine in half. We're going to see what happens. This is how it works, but an amazing talk, and just the energy and the action has been incredible. So this is called, I hope it's okay that it's called Breaking the Mould.
That's what it's called now.
It's called Breaking the Mould. The table is round. Let's put a sledgehammer through it. Make 100 tables, 1,000 tables. Put the pieces of the table in a blender. Add high integrity, context, and some flair. Pour in risk with a whisk to make air. Shuffle the chairs. Keep them shaking. We are future fortunes raking, making money flow quickly out of pockets into soil. So micro explosions can take root, seeds begin to shoot, and in the edges, new markets flourish and emerge.
All stand. If we could change one thing, let's fail more. Who's in the room? Who needs to be in the room? Storytellers, story doers, finance, science, public, private, poets. We blend, we try, we learn. What is the theory of if you could change one thing? Understanding what community resilience means, local knowledge, convince investment funds to lean in, accelerate finance, high integrity, tolerance for system-wide impact, understanding what measures are to attract the finance, greater risk appetite, developing country governments raising own revenue, people on the ground know best. The perception of risk is higher than reality. Return comes faster than you expect. So what's working? $65 million invested in small-scale Nigerian farmers, $2 billion in sales. Prove the model, and roll, and roll, and roll. In apartheid South Africa, communities came together to educate young people to build against and beyond apartheid, and the same model works for climate change. Community is resilience, community is mechanism, community is the lens. Mobile money puts revolution in pockets. Opportunities for change Ask the locals in Tanzania what they know about rainfall and irrigation. Ask companies what they're doing for supply chains. Ask communities, join the dots, look after each stepping stone. How to attract finance to the Caribbean. Tourist economies, heavy debt, climate vulnerable. Scale is not always scalable. Step back from KPIs. Climate is in food, is in transport, is in security, is in migration, stitches in the fabric of everything, everywhere, all at once.
Don't stop acting and reacting. Break the mould. If we want our lineage to get old, we must be bold. The stakes are high, it's do or die, and we must know that money needs to fail to weave a bigger sail into the face of tension. Don't rebuild a single table in the hope of keeping our fear stable. Instead, invite all the people in the village to come in, share a drink with all our different ways to think, and make a plate for our ancestors and a place for our neighbours and a better fate for our children.
Thank you. Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I almost don't feel worthy. That was great. What words to carry us forward? Jorge, with your permission, let's just roll into food, keep the conversation going. Feel free to speak to any of us, but speak to each other. We're not going anywhere. Thank you, guys.